Hi, my name is James Rogers. Today I'm going to talk about how to improve your IELTS speaking test score. First off, I have lots of IELTS experience. I've actually been an IELTS speaking test examiner since 2017, and I still do it today. I have lots of teaching experience as well. I've taught English in Japan for 20 years, and I'm currently a tenured university professor here. I also have lots of research experience. I've published approximately 50 articles. I created an English learning app series that has been downloaded over 200,000 times. And I've won over 30 million yen worth of grants to do language research. I've also written an upcoming book on English collocations. In the link below, you can check out some of my apps. So I'm going to talk about 3 points first: general advice, scoring criteria, and then I'm going to play a sample test. As for general advice, first of all, I'd like to talk about typical scores. Note that most Japanese candidates will usually receive a 5 or a 6. If you do get a score that's higher than that, then you did good. And that score can help you get jobs or get into a master's degree or study abroad program. A score of 4 is considered quite low, but such scores are very rare. A score of 7 or higher is considered excellent, and a score of 9 is considered to be equal to a native speaker. So 7, 8, or 9, those are pretty rare as well. Okay, so before starting, have your ID ready to show, but wait until the examiner asks for it. The examiner must read out some information at the beginning, so do not interrupt. Then, after, they must ask for your name again, so don't be surprised by this. Also, don't come into the room and say, I'm nervous, right from the start. Giving a negative impression, because IELTS scoring is a bit subjective, so by starting off negative, you may end up with a 5 instead of a 6, as it may subconsciously affect the examiner's rating of you. Time limits. So there's 3 parts to the test. For part 1, it's 5 minutes for 3 sets of 3 to 4 questions, so from 9 to 12 questions in total. The examiner must end part 1 at 5 minutes maximum, so don't be surprised if the examiner interrupts you. For part 2, you have 1 minute of preparation time, and then you have 2 minutes yourself only of speaking time. The examiner must end part 2 as soon as 2 minutes have gone by after you have started talking. So again, don't be surprised if the examiner interrupts you. For part 3, 5 minutes maximum, there's going to be 2 sets of questions, and there'll be 2 to 4 questions in each set. So from 4 to 8 total. The examiner must end part 3 at 5 minutes maximum, 14 minutes maximum for the test in total. So, yet again, don't be surprised if the examiner interrupts you. Section tips. Okay, so I'm going to give you some tips for part 1. Try to keep your answers within 1.5 minutes. You can ask to repeat, but try to avoid this if you can. Particularly, try not to ask the examiner to repeat multiple questions. If you really can't understand the question, you can ask the examiner to repeat it, but if you ask them to repeat 1 or more questions, the examiner will realize that you have low listening ability and a low comprehension of vocabulary or collocations, and this will affect your grade. You can ask the meaning of a particular word, and the examiner can define it in 1 to 2 words, but it's best to avoid this if you can. Note that in part 1, you cannot ask for a paraphrase of the questions. Also, If the question is a yes or no question, don't just say yes or no. Add some details, such as why. Okay, now on to part 2. You cannot ask for a paraphrase of the question. This is not a section to ask questions about in the beginning unless you are really confused. You have the question that the examiner just said in front of you in the booklet, and below it are some ideas of things to talk about. Use those to help you understand the question and to prepare things to say. Take the notepaper and quietly start making notes immediately for the first minute and wait until the examiner says to start speaking. Make sure you talk for the entire time. If you run out of things to say, just come up with anything to say to just keep talking. Okay, so now on to part 3. You usually have around 45 seconds per answer in this section. This section is structured more like a conversation than parts 2 and 3. Thus, the examiner will not only ask you a question, but they will ask you 2 follow-up questions to 2 of your answers. In part 3, you can ask, can you paraphrase the question? And also ask for definitions of particular words. Okay, so that's all for the 3 sections. Now on to scoring criteria. First, I'm going to talk about fluency and coherence. Try to answer questions as quickly as possible without having silence. Don't fill time with fillers from your native language. For example, in Japanese, that would be eto. Either don't say any fillers like that or replace it with the typical English filler. Don't try to fill time in an obvious way when you are struggling to think of an answer, such as by saying, that's a good question. That's an interesting question. That's a tough question. To a question that's not really good, interesting, or tough. Okay, now for lexical resource. I'm going to talk about 4 different points. So first, colloquial language. This is the kind of language not taught in textbooks. It includes everyday language and slang. For example, saying no biggie instead of no big deal, or chill at home instead of relax at home. Using it makes you sound as if you lived in an English-speaking country. There are lots of resources on the internet to learn such language, but I think the best way to learn it is by watching TV and movies in English. I particularly recommend addictive TV shows that have each episode and in a cliffhanger, making you want to watch more. By doing this, you can have fun while you learn. I've actually made a site with my recommendations for my top 50 addictive TV shows. This site also has my top 50 movies based on true stories, top 100 fictional films, and over 300 recommended songs from over 30 different genres of music. Check it out here. Now on to advanced vocabulary. If you know some advanced vocabulary, you can improve your score for lexical fluency. However, situations when you can use advanced vocabulary, such as obstetrician, the word for a doctor that delivers babies, are rare. Instead, I recommend learning high-value alternatives, HVAs. It's a term I invented to describe words that can replace more common vocabulary. For example, you can often replace the word lucky with serendipitous. I did a research project that identified 3,550 HVAs. The list is broken down into 3 files. Rating 1 is around 1,800 words, and these are words that non-native speakers with basic language skills might not know. So around TOEIC 600 to 650. Rating 2, my team identified around 1,400 words, and These are words that native speakers with a low level of education might not regularly use, and rating 3 are the most difficult ones. We identified 360 words, and these are words that even some college graduate native speakers may have heard, but are not 100% sure about the meaning. Thus, if you're a non-native speaker, I recommend starting with words with a rating of 1 or 2, but if you are a native speaker, I recommend starting with words with a rating of 2 or 3. However, if you're short on time, you could skip ratings 1 and 2 sets and just master the 360 advanced HVAs and start to sound highly educated immediately. You can access the lists here. I've even made an updated list that has the top 365 words to learn that are like level 3s, so you can learn one per day for a year. Check out my YouTube video for that. Here are a few examples from the lists. Okay, so here are some examples. You can pause the video and try to guess the meaning of some of them, and then you can start the video again and you'll see the answers. Okay, so here are the answers. He was prone to fits of violence. He was likely to have fits of violence, stuff like that. That's going to earn you some extra points for a lexical resource. Okay, so for collocations. Collocations are words that commonly occur together, such as jury's verdict or bring tears to my eyes, etc. To learn common English collocations, I recommend that Japanese learners use my app Eigo Master Sanzen, and Korean learners use my app General English for Koreans. These two apps teach common phrases that are said differently between the two languages. For example, in Japanese you say drink medicine, but in English we say take medicine. These apps help these learners avoid such common errors. These apps teach English in phrases, which is much more efficient than learning from vocabulary lists and studying grammar separately. The contents are from my PhD research, which created the only large-scale list of its kind in the world. The apps also have an advanced Lightner algorithm that helps you to learn quickly as well, among other advanced features. Okay, for idioms. Having a variety of idioms memorized can help you increase your lexical score if you have a chance to use them. The following are some examples, but you can find many more simply by searching for English idioms on the internet. Here's one example. Okay, so here's a few examples that I think would be useful for you. Again, you can pause the video now and you can try to take a guess about the meaning of these, and then you can start to play the video again and I'll show you the answers. Okay, so here are the answers. So I chose a few that I think are very useful because if you look at number 1, experiencing something positive, well, that's something that you might talk about during the test. It's pretty common, right? So instead of saying, I was so happy, you can say, I was on cloud 9. Now, number 2, let's look at another one. Accepting something negative, like something that you don't want to do, we say you have to bite the bullet, right? Sometimes you lose a game, sometimes you lose your job. So I had to bite the bullet and just accept the fact that I lost. And so on. So you can check out these in particular. I think if you memorize them, there's a decent chance that you might actually be able to use them, and then you can earn some extra points for your score. Okay, now on to grammar. Again, I recommend my app Eigo Master Sanzen for Japanese students or General English for Koreans. And these apps will help you learn grammar, vocabulary, and collocations at the same time. By mastering the phrases of this app, you learn grammar subconsciously, in a similar way to how native speakers learn their language. Often, a native speaker struggles to explain a grammar point, but will always speak in perfectly grammatical chunks of language. When asked why, they often just explain that, it's just the way that it's said. In other words, they memorize particular patterns of language via these phrases, and thus they also memorize the grammar those phrases contain subconsciously. Of course, studying grammar directly can also be very useful, but the method I just mentioned is usually a skill set that most students lack because they were never taught this way. However, most researchers agree that learning language in chunks, not grammar separately and singular vocabulary, is a very efficient way to learn. So why don't schools teach this way? Also, why don't most college English textbooks teach this way either? The reason is that a well-made, easy-to-study list of common English phrases is very difficult to create, and the apps I recommend contain the first list in the world that does this. I also recommend this book for Japanese learners. Now I'm going to talk about pronunciation. For pronunciation, try to improve upon specific sounds that learners are weak with. Use my free pronunciation apps for Japanese, Chinese, and Korean learners. You can also download a list of words that are difficult to pronounce for Japanese learners on my website here. I also created a difficult pronunciation highlighter software that you can paste text into, such as a speech, and it will highlight words that Japanese learners usually have trouble with. It can also be found on my website. The results look like this. Okay, so I chose 4 different sounds, but there's many more. And when you choose the sounds, it's going to highlight the words that have them. So the ER sound, at the end of words, usually, the schwa sound, and it'll be color coded so you could find the words. And then you can just click on one of the words and you can hear the proper pronunciation. Another common issue for those who want to master American English pronunciation is the many words that are spelled with an O but have the ah sound. This is particularly difficult for a big problem for Japanese learners. The following is a list of the most common ones in English, and this list can also be freely downloaded on my website. So Japanese learners will usually say accommodate instead of accommodate, accomplish instead of accomplish, and so on. Geography instead of the proper geography. God instead of God. Okay, so that's all for pronunciation. Now I'm going to get to the sample test. Okay, so the following is a sample test. Notice the words or phrases that are underlined. They are either advanced words or phrases that can help you earn extra points, or words or phrases which are slang that helps you to sound more like a native speaker.
Let's talk about your hometown. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in a town called Inuyama. It's nice. People mostly live back there.
When you were younger, what did you think of it?
Well, I liked living there, but now it bores me to death, so I want to move to a bigger city.
What do you think makes a place a good place to live?
I'm really not sure. Your guess is as good as mine. I guess it depends on the person. As for me, I just want to live close to all my friends.
Let's talk about sunny days. When it's sunny, what do people usually do in your country?
When it's sunny, people usually go to parks. Also, my neighbors often have barbecues, which drives me nuts because it smells so good.
Do you think you'd like to live in a place that is sunny all the time?
Well, I'd like to, but not too sunny because I don't like really hot weather. But then again, I do like to go snowboarding sometimes, so I'd miss that.
What kind of problems do sunny days create?
I guess sunny days can be bad for people who have sensitive skin. Also, in Japan, there are a lot of older people and they can come down with heat stroke, so it's dangerous.
Let's talk about the internet. How old were you when you first started using the internet daily?
Maybe around 10. It's terrible actually because now I can't live without it.
What kind of things do you usually look at on the internet?
Mostly funny videos. There's one YouTuber I really like, so I will always watch her videos. They crack me up.
How do you think the internet will change in the future?
I'm not sure. Maybe something to do with AI? I wish AI could take this test for me. I studied my butt off for it, so I'm exhausted right now.
Now, I'd like you to talk for 2 minutes about a topic. You'll have 1 minute to think about what you're going to say. Here's your topic and here's some paper. You can make some notes if you wish. I'd like you to describe a time when someone needed help and you helped them. All right? Now, don't worry if I stop you. I'll tell you when the time is up. Can you start speaking now, please?
So there was this time I was at the train station just waiting for my train and I heard a strange sound. It was like a person in pain. I turned around to look and an old woman was laying on the stairs. She had fallen down the stairs. I looked around at the other people to see if anyone was going to help her, but they all just looked at her. Some people, right? So I went over to her and tried to help her get up, but she couldn't stand. So I had to hold her arm to help her stand. I noticed that her leg was bleeding too. I was kind of grossed out by it, but I didn't want to leave her alone. So I stood there for a while helping her stand until she could get her balance. I asked her if she wanted me to call an ambulance for her, but she said no. Eventually, she was able to stand on her own and I let her go. she just walked back up the stairs. I guess she was going back home. I felt really bad for her. I also thought the people that didn't try to help her were terrible. I was only 17 at the time, and I didn't really know what to do, but they were all adults, so I thought that they should have tried to help her first. I think nowadays, people have low morals of something. Plus, you often see on YouTube when stuff like that happens, people will just take out their phones and start recording instead of trying to help. That's even worse. Not only is it moral, but it's also an invasion of privacy. I just think it was me that fell down the stairs and was bleeding. I want someone to help, you know?
Thank you. Can I have the booklet and paperback, please? You've been talking about a time when someone needed help and you helped them, and I'd like to ask you a few more questions related to this. Let's consider, first of all, help from parents. At what age do children stop needing to rely on their parents?
Well, in Japan, usually either after high school or college, a lot of people live with their parents during college. So I guess that's a reason why. I wouldn't want to though.
Why not?
Well, my mom nags me a lot.
Why do many people live with their parents during college?
I think it's because it's expensive to live on your own. Also, not many universities in Japan have dorms.
I see. How about getting help from friends? What kinds of things do people usually get help from friends?
Do you mean young people?
Well, your answer doesn't have to only be about young people.
Okay, well, I can't really speak for adults because I'm only 18, but people my age usually rely on each other for things like getting advice, studying, or for advice about dating and stuff like that.
I understand. Now, I'd like to talk about getting help from the government. What kind of things can citizens get help from the government?
In Japan, the government provides health insurance, so that's one big thing. I think it's pretty cheap and the quality is good, so most people are happy with it. But the government isn't perfect though. You often hear about politicians taking bribes and things like that on the news.
I see. How about things that the government, either local or national, asks for help from citizens?
Oh, let me think about that for a second. Well, in some countries, there's a draft like South Korea, but in Japan, we don't have that. But some people do volunteer to join the self-defense forces. That's a national thing. As for local government, I see many retired people volunteering to do things like stand at the corners in the morning and afternoon when little kids are walking to and from school. They usually hold flags to make sure that drivers can see the kids are walking across the street.
I see. Are the roads dangerous in Japan?
I don't really think they are. People are very careful driving in general, but perhaps the people volunteer just to be safe. I guess it's better to be safe than sorry.
Yes, that's true. How about volunteering to help the poor? Is that common in Japan?
I'm not really sure if I would say it's common, but people do collect money to help those in need. For example, if there's an earthquake and a lot of people become homeless. You'll often see young people at train stations collecting money to donate to help them.
I see. That is the end of the speaking test.
To conclude, getting a high score on the speaking section of the IELTS test takes hard work, but by following these tips, you should be able to improve your score a bit. Good luck on your test.